A young billionaire visits a hospital to make a donation and meets a poor little girl hugging a teddy bear, saying, "My mum said she'd come back after the surgery. I'm still waiting." He sees the mother's name on the medical chart and starts crying when he finds out what happened to her. Miles Wilson crossed his legs for the fourth time in less than 5 minutes, checking his wristwatch once more. 43 minutes of waiting, a valuable chunk of time that could have been used to finish contracts or analyze financial reports. His Swiss quartz watch, an indulgent gift to himself when he closed his first big deal, seemed to mock him with every tick. The hospital waiting room was crowded. A mix of tired and worried faces filled the faded blue plastic chairs. The air carried a slight smell of disinfectant mixed with coffee from the vending machine down the hallway. Miles hated hospitals, the exposed vulnerability, the constant reminder of human fragility. It all unsettled him deeply. He was there only because Jennifer, the head of the company's public relations, insisted that donating blood would be great for improving his public image. People like CEOs who demonstrate social responsibility, she argued. With the company's new product about to launch, Miles reluctantly agreed. His presence at the hospital would be well documented, with discreet photos for the annual report and corporate social media. To make use of the time while waiting to be called, he checked emails on his phone. The bright screen showed an endless sequence of messages, meeting confirmations, quarterly reports, investor inquiries, an invitation to speak at a conference. Miles scrolled through them, replying to the urgent ones, prioritizing his time as he always did. "Mr. Wilson?" Miles looked up, hoping he was finally being called for the blood donation, but the nurse standing at the door called a different name. He went back to checking his phone, slightly annoyed. It was then, while trying to craft a response to a particularly delicate email, that he noticed her presence. 3 chairs to his right, sitting all alone, was a little girl holding a worn-out teddy bear in her lap. It wasn't typical for Miles to notice children. Generally, they represented noise, unpredictability, and disorder, 3 elements he had meticulously eradicated from his personal and professional life. But there was something about that specific child that caught his attention. She looked around 6 or 7 years old. Brown, curly hair fell to her shoulders, pinned on one side with a simple star-shaped clip. Her small face bore a seriousness that seemed out of place for her age. She wore a lavender t-shirt, slightly too big for her, and jeans with a little patch on one knee. What stood out the most to Miles was the teddy bear in her arms. It was clearly handmade, with faded brown fabric, mismatched buttons for eyes and on its chest. The seams showed signs of multiple repairs, as if it had been mended countless times over the years. The girl spoke quietly to the bear, settling it carefully in her lap as though it were made of the world's most precious material. Her feet, which didn't reach the floor, swung lightly in a rhythm only she seemed to hear. Miles looked away, trying to refocus on his emails. None of this was his business. Probably the child was with some adult who had stepped out to the restroom or gone for coffee. There was no reason for such a small girl to be alone in a hospital. Even so, his attention kept drifting back to her every few seconds. Something about the loneliness of that tiny figure felt out of place, unsettling. After a few minutes, Miles realized that no adult had appeared to join the girl. She was still alone, occasionally talking to her teddy bear as if it were her only companion. Without giving it much thought, Miles slid his phone into his pocket and moved closer, taking a seat 1 chair away from the child. "Hi," he said, trying to sound casual. "That's an interesting teddy bear." The girl looked up, surprised that he had spoken to her, but she wasn't frightened. She had large brown eyes with a quiet kind of maturity Miles had never before seen in a child. "His name is Mr. Buttons," she replied, holding the teddy bear up a bit. "My mom made him for me. Mr. Buttons." "That's a good name," Miles commented, noticing more closely the different colored buttons that formed the bear's eyes and were sewn onto its chest. "Your mum is very talented." The girl nodded seriously. "She knows how to do a lot of things. She mends people's clothes and makes dresses too." "And where is she now?" Miles asked, glancing around as if he weren't really interested. That was when the girl's expression changed, a shadow briefly crossing her small face. She clutched the teddy bear tighter to her chest. Mum said she'd come back after the surgery. I'm still waiting. The simplicity of that statement, the raw vulnerability in a child's voice, struck Miles in a way he hadn't expected. Something in that moment, the little girl alone, the worn teddy bear, the oppressive silence of the hallway, triggered an almost physical response. A tightening in his chest, an uncomfortable feeling he couldn't name. "Have you been waiting a long time?" he asked, his voice coming out oddly soft. The girl shrugged, a gesture surprisingly adult-like. "A while." The sun was still out. Miles looked at the window. It was already dark. If the girl was correct, that meant she'd been there alone for at least 4 or 5 hours. "What's your name?" "Sophie," she answered, adjusting the worn-out ribbon around the bear's neck. "Sophie Carter." The last name didn't trigger an immediate reaction in Miles. Carter was common enough not to mean anything specific, but something about the entire situation left him uneasy. "I can see Mr. Buttons is really special to you," he commented. Sophie nodded. "He's been with me forever. When I'm scared, he helps me be brave." "Are you scared right now?" The girl hesitated, as if weighing how honest to be. "A little. Hospitals are kind of strange." "And it's taking a really long time." Miles nodded, feeling an unexpected empathy. "I agree with you. Hospitals are strange places." A nurse hurried past in the hallway, and Miles noticed how Sophie's eyes followed her hopefully, then dropped to the floor with slight disappointment. An uneasiness grew inside him, a small child, alone for hours, with no one checking on her. It didn't seem right. "Sophie, I'm going to ask at the reception about your mom, okay? Maybe they have some information." The girl looked up, a small spark of hope appearing on her face. "Can you do that? They never tell me anything because I'm a kid." "I'll try," Miles said, standing up, ending. He walked to the reception desk, where a middle-aged woman typed quickly on a computer. There was a short line, but Miles waited patiently, something unusual for his typical temperament. When it was his turn, he used his most assertive tone, the one he reserved for high-stakes negotiations. "Excuse me, I'm concerned about a situation. There's a little girl in the waiting room who's been alone for hours. Her name is Sophie Carter, and apparently her mother is in surgery. I'd like to know if there's any information available about her case." The receptionist looked at him over her reading glasses. "Are you a relative?" "No, just a concerned citizen." "A child that young shouldn't be by herself for so long." The woman sighed, seeming tired. "I agree with you, but we have rules about patient confidentiality." Miles held her gaze. "I understand privacy regulations. I'm not asking for medical details. Just if anyone is aware that a child's been alone for hours." The receptionist seemed to consider the situation for a moment. She looked over at Sophie, who sat patiently with her teddy bear, and something in her expression softened. "Let me check," she finally said, typing something into the computer. "Carter. Carter. Oh, yes. Emergency case. A car ran off the road on Main Street and hit several pedestrians. She arrived earlier this afternoon." Miles nodded, trying not to show how much the word hit affected him. "And the little girl, is there any other adult responsible for her?" The receptionist continued reviewing the information on the screen. "No additional emergency contacts identified in the record, just mother and daughter." The situation was worse than Miles had imagined. A child completely on her own, while her mother fought for her life somewhere in this hospital. "May I see the medical chart? Maybe I can help locate a family member." The receptionist hesitated, clearly torn between following protocol and recognizing an exceptional situation. "Normally we wouldn't do this, but..." She glanced at Sophie again. "I'll show you only the basic information, nothing about her medical status, just so we can try to find any relatives." She pulled out a folder and opened it on the counter, turning it partially toward Miles. His eyes quickly scanned the information until they found the patient's full name: Emily Carter. The shock was immediate and visceral. Miles felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. The air rushed out of his lungs, and for a moment he was paralyzed, unable to process what he'd just seen. Emily Carter, his sister. The name he hadn't heard in over 10 years. The person he'd severed all ties with, determined to forge his own path. the sister he had left behind in the name of ambition and success. "Sir?" The receptionist's voice sounded distant. Miles tried to gather himself, but his mind was spinning. Emily was somewhere in that hospital, on an operating table, fighting for her life. And the little girl sitting alone in the waiting room, Sophie, was his niece. A niece whose existence he didn't even know about. "Are you all right, sir?" the receptionist pressed, clearly worried by his sudden pallor. "Yes, Emily Carter is my sister," he finally managed to say, his own voice sounding strange to him. "We haven't spoken in a long time. I didn't know." Now it was the receptionist's turn to be surprised. "Oh, then the girl is your niece. What a coincidence that you're here today of all days." Coincidence? Miles almost laughed at the irony. He was there solely for a staged corporate photo shoot disguised as a charitable act. Now he discovered that his sister, whom he hadn't spoken to in over a decade, was fighting for her life after a car lost control and hit her, and that his niece, whom he never knew he had, was sitting alone in the waiting room. "Yes, a coincidence?" he repeated mechanically. Miles looked over at Sophie, who was still talking quietly to her worn teddy bear. How had he not noticed before? Her curly hair, the shape of her eyes, they were Emily's. Now that he knew, the similarities were blatant, glaring. "What is her condition?" he asked, still trying to process the avalanche of information. "She's still in surgery. It's a serious case, but the medical team is excellent. As soon as we have news, we can let you know." Miles nodded, thanked the receptionist, and walked back to the waiting room, each step feeling like it required extraordinary effort. Sophie looked up hopefully when she saw him approaching. "Did you find out anything about my mom?" she asked in a small voice, clutching her teddy bear. Miles stopped a few steps away, suddenly unsure. What should he say? How to explain who he was, or rather, who he should have been but never was? "Your mother is still in surgery," he finally replied, taking the simplest path. "The doctors are taking good care of her." Sophie nodded, as if she'd expected that answer. "Mr. Buttons said it would take a while. He's wise about these things." Miles sat down again, this time closer. He studied Sophie up close, searching for more signs of Emily, trying to understand how his life had come to this point. How could he be so successful professionally, a CEO of a rising company, with a considerable fortune, yet so disconnected from what truly mattered? His phone vibrated in his pocket. Probably Jennifer asking about the photos of the blood donation, or maybe one of the investors impatient for answers, or his assistant reminding him of a meeting scheduled for that night. For the first time in years, Miles didn't bother to see who was calling. The message could wait. Everything could wait. Right there, sitting just a few inches away, was a part of his family he never knew. A brave girl who patiently waited, hugging a worn teddy bear, for a mother who might not come back. And Miles, who had spent so much time running from the past, building walls around his emotions, felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. A genuine connection. A feeling that couldn't be quantified on a spreadsheet or measured in quarterly growth. For the first time in more than a decade, he was face to face with the consequences of his choices. And, surprisingly, for the first time in a long while, he felt that he was exactly where he needed to be. Miles sat a few chairs away, watching Sophie. The waiting room had emptied out a bit over the last few hours, with only a few nighttime patients scattered in the corners. The silence was broken only by the distant sounds of phones ringing, nurses talking, and the occasional overhead announcement. Sophie didn't seem bothered by the passing of time. She remained seated with surprising patience for someone so young, softly talking to her worn-out teddy bear, as though he were her closest confidant. "Mr. Buttons, do you think the doctors are taking good care of Mom?" she whispered, adjusting the ribbon around the toy's neck. "You always say she's strong, but she looked tired this morning." Miles watched as the girl tilted her head, pretending to hear an answer from the teddy bear. "Yeah, I know. But she promised to take me to the park this weekend. Guess we'll have to postpone it again." There was a maturity in her words, an understanding of reality that seemed disproportionate for someone so small. Miles wondered how many other promises had been postponed in the girl's life, how many times Emily had to explain that circumstances were stronger than their wishes. Sophie began to hum quietly, a simple, gentle melody. Her childish voice echoed softly in the silent corridor. creating a bubble of intimacy amid the institutional coldness of the hospital. Miles froze. He recognized that tune. It was the same melody Emily used to sing when they were kids. The same their mother used to sing to them at bedtime. A simple lullaby-like song passed down through generations in the family. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting himself be carried away by the sound. Emily at 20, singing while tidying up the small apartment they shared after their parents' death. Emily folding clothes meticulously, organizing the few things they owned, always with that melody on her lips, as though the song could stave off life's hardships. Emily always sang, even on the hardest days, as if music were her way of resisting, a way to affirm that life went on regardless. She sang while making breakfast, sang while studying, sang after coming home from work, no matter how exhausted. "Life is tough enough without us staying silent, Miles," she used to say when he complained about her singing. "If I stop singing, it's because I've given up, and I never will." Determination, that was the word that best described Emily. Determined, resilient, full of dreams, even when reality seemed stacked against her. While Miles saw obstacles, Emily saw challenges. While he calculated risks, she embraced possibilities. Sophie stopped humming and returned to talking to her teddy bear. Miles noticed how her gestures were identical to Emily's, the way she tilted her head slightly to the right when focused, how her index finger absent-mindedly played with a curl of hair while she thought. How had he not immediately realized this was Emily's daughter? Now that he knew, the similarities were glaring, obvious. The same curly brown hair, the same eye shape, and the same stubborn chin. And to think he might have just passed through that waiting room, donated blood, and left, never knowing his niece had been just a few feet away. Life was full of such cruel ironies, those near misses, those lost opportunities. Or maybe, Miles thought, it wasn't an irony but a second chance. The memory of his last conversation with Emily rose in his mind, vivid as if it happened yesterday, not over 10 years ago. The tiny apartment they shared since their parents' death. Emily sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea between her hands, her face showing the exhaustion of someone who had just lost her job. Miles standing, holding a letterhead from a company in another state. "When do you leave?" she asked, her voice almost too calm. "In 2 weeks," Miles replied, avoiding her gaze. "You've already decided, then?" "You're not asking me, you're telling me." Miles remembered feeling annoyed at her tone. "It's an opportunity I can't refuse, Emily. It's the fresh start I need." "What about me? About us? I just lost my job. The rent is overdue." "You'll find another job. You always do. And once I get established, I'll send money." "It's not about money, Miles. It's always about money in the end. No, it's about choices, about priorities." Emily finally looked up at him. "It's about you choosing your big dreams over everything and everyone." "That's unfair. I have a right to pursue something better in life, and I don't." "You think I don't have my own dreams, but I never considered leaving you behind." Miles's response was quick and cruel. "Maybe that's your problem. You cling too much to the past, to people. You'll never get anywhere like that." He saw the hurt in her eyes, but he didn't back down. Her calculated coldness inside him was already defining the man he would become, a ruthless executive, focused only on results. "You know what's funny, Miles?" Emily said, her voice almost a whisper. "I always thought our parents would be proud of both of us, of how we moved on, how we stayed united. Now I see they'd only be proud of one of us. Don't use our parents against me. I'm just stating the obvious. They raised us to be better than this, to know what really matters. What matters is not ending up like them. That's no life, Emily. They had something you'll never have if you keep thinking like this. What? Overdue bills? Constant worries? Love. Family. A purpose beyond money." Miles laughed, a cold, distant sound. "Cheap philosophy doesn't pay the bills." Emily stared at him for a long moment, as if seeing her brother for the first time, or maybe the last. "Then leave, but don't come back when you realize money can't buy happiness." He left the next morning, not 2 weeks later as he'd originally planned. He left a check and a note with his new address and phone number, a note Emily never answered. Her words echoed in his mind now as he watched Sophie. Don't come back when you realize money can't buy happiness. She'd been right, of course. She always was. Miles had everything he ever wanted: success, money, recognition. He was the CEO of a growing company, owned a luxury apartment, drove an imported car, wore designer clothes. He dined at upscale restaurants, moved in exclusive circles, had his name in business magazines. Yet there he was, in a hospital waiting room, watching a girl he'd just discovered was his niece and feeling emptier than ever. How had he come so far in life, and yet become so distant from what really mattered? Sophie put her teddy bear in her small backpack and took out a sketch pad, its edges frayed. She started drawing something, her tongue peeking out at the corner of her mouth as she focused, a habit Emily had too. Miles kept watching in silence, weighed down by 10 years of absence, selfish choices, and lost opportunities. His phone vibrated in his pocket again, probably something work-related, a meeting, a contract, an urgent decision. Hours ago, he would have checked it immediately, putting business ahead of everything else. This time, he left the device where it was. Some messages could wait. Some priorities needed revisiting. Miles watched Sophie, lost in thought about time, choices, and second chances, about a determined sister who wouldn't give up, about a niece who waited patiently, about a worn-out teddy bear that told silent stories of love and perseverance, about how much one could lose while being busy winning everything one thought they wanted. A deep voice broke Miles's reverie. "Family of Emily Carter?" Miles sprang to his feet from where he'd been watching Sophie at a distance. A tall man with brown skin and Indian features, wearing a white coat over blue surgical scrubs, stood in the middle of the hallway. His face was tired, with deep circles under his eyes, carrying the seriousness of someone who spends hours fighting for people's lives. "Here," Miles responded, walking over quickly. The doctor sized him up with a quick glance. "And you are?" "Miles Wilson. I'm her brother." The words sounded strange on his tongue, like he was speaking a language he hadn't used in years. "And this is Sophie, her daughter, my niece." Sophie, who had noticed the commotion, approached timidly, squeezing Mr. Buttons against her chest. "Doctor, is my mum awake yet?" she asked softly, but firmly. The doctor crouched slightly, getting closer to her eye level. His austere face softened a bit. "Not yet, sweetheart. But we're taking very good care of her." He straightened up again, addressing Miles. "I'm Dr. Sharma, the surgeon in charge. May we speak in private for a moment?" Miles hesitated, looking at Sophie. "Don't worry. One of our nurses can stay with her for a few minutes," the doctor reassured him, gesturing to a young nurse who approached with a gentle smile. "Hi, Sophie. How about coming with me to see if we can find some juice or hot chocolate while your uncle talks to the doctor?" Sophie looked at Miles, as if seeking approval. That look, so trusting even though she'd just met him, made a wave of indescribable emotion wash over him. "It's okay. I'll meet you in a few minutes," he assured her, trying to sound more confident than he felt. While Sophie walked away hand in hand with the nurse, Dr. Sharma led Miles to a small empty consultation room, closing the door behind them. "Mr. Wilson, your sister was hit by a car that lost control on Main Street around 1:30 p.m. A witness reported that the driver jumped the curb and struck 3 pedestrians. Your sister was the most seriously injured." Miles felt his chest tighten, picturing the scene. Emily walking along, maybe thinking about her next sewing project or what to make for Sophie's dinner, when her life was violently interrupted by a car gone off track. "How is she?" he managed to ask. "We performed an emergency surgery that lasted almost 6 hours. There were multiple fractures and significant internal bleeding, and we had to remove her spleen, which was irreparably damaged," the doctor explained, with the professional objectivity that comes from years of facing daily tragedies. "We managed to stabilize her, but her condition is still delicate. The next 48 hours will be critical." Miles leaned against the wall, feeling his legs weaken. "Will she survive?" Dr. Sharma sighed, allowing himself a brief moment of humanity beyond his professionalism. "We're doing everything we can. She's young and seemed healthy before the accident. That's in her favor. But it would be irresponsible for me to make promises." Miles nodded, appreciating the honesty, however painful. When she arrived at the ER, Was she conscious? He asked, trying to imagine what Emily must have felt, the fear she must have experienced. Yes, briefly. She was very worried about her daughter. Apparently, they were together at the time of the accident, but the little girl wasn't hit. What did she say? The doctor quickly checked some notes on a clipboard. She asked us to find someone to stay with her daughter, mentioned there was no one else in town, no close relatives. Our social worker tried to contact some numbers we found in her purse, but with no success. Miles felt a pang of shame. If Emily said there was no one, it was because there truly was no one, not even a brother she could count on after so long. Did she say anything else before she was sedated? Doctor. Sharma hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether he should share that information. She only talked about her daughter, asked us to make sure Sophie was okay, that she wouldn't be left alone. She mentioned that if anything happened to her, there was a letter in a blue box in her bedroom closet. That was all done before she lost consciousness. Miles closed his eyes for a moment. Emily's final concern wasn't for herself, her pain or her fate, but for Sophie. Even on the brink of unconsciousness, her last thought was for her child. "Can I see her?" Miles asked, his voice slightly trembling. "She's in the ICU, sedated and intubated. Visits are restricted, but I can authorize a brief visit given the circumstances. Just a few minutes." Miles nodded in gratitude. "And the girl, Sophie's been waiting for hours. Normally, children aren't allowed in the ICU, but perhaps we can make an exception and let her see her mom through the glass, just to give her a bit of reassurance." After that, the doctor let the sentence trail off, giving Miles a meaningful look. "I'll take her," Miles stated without hesitation, surprising even himself with the firmness in his voice. "I'm her uncle. I'll take care of Sophie while Emily recovers." Dr. Sharma looked relieved. "I'm glad to hear that. The girl's been here all day and it's no place for a child." As they exited the consultation room, they found Sophie sitting in a chair in the hallway, holding a cup of hot chocolate in her small hands. Mr. Buttons was carefully placed beside her. "How was your talk with the doctor?" she asked with a seriousness beyond her years. "Is Mom going to get better soon?" Miles sat next to her, searching for words that were truthful but not frightening. "Your mom is resting now. The doctors did surgery to help her get better. It'll take time, but they're taking very good care of her." Sophie nodded, as though she fully grasped the gravity of the situation. "Can I see her?" "Dr. Sharma said we can see her briefly through a window. She's asleep right now with special medicine, so she won't feel pain, and there are some machines helping her breathe." The girl bit her lip, hesitating. She'll be scared if she wakes up and I'm not there. The simplicity of her worry tightened Miles's throat. Sophie wasn't worried about herself, where she'd sleep or what she'd eat, but about how her mother would feel. "We'll leave a note with the nurses, so when she wakes up, she'll know exactly where you are and that you're okay." Miles took Sophie to the ICU, where they could see Emily through a glass panel. Miles almost didn't recognize his sister. Her face was pale, with bruises starting to turn dark. Tubes and wires connected her to various machines beeping and flashing. Sophie stood quietly, watching. She didn't cry, didn't ask questions. She just held Mr. Buttons a little tighter. "She looks so still," she finally said. "The medicine is helping her rest so she can get better faster," Miles explained, feeling awkward and unprepared for the situation. After a few minutes, Dr. Sharma respectfully indicated it was time to go. Miles noted Sophie hadn't eaten anything since arriving at the hospital, and it was already past 9 at night. "Sophie, you must be hungry. How about we go get something to eat?" The girl didn't answer right away, her eyes still on her unmoving mother. "We can come back early tomorrow to check on her," Miles promised. "Dr. Sharma will look after her in the meantime." Finally, Sophie nodded, although reluctantly. Miles guided her out of the hospital, surprised at how easily she placed her small hand in his, trusting him completely, despite only having known him for a few hours. The weight of that innocent trust hit him hard. He wouldn't let this child down. Near the hospital was a cozy diner still open. Miles led Sophie there, choosing a quiet table in the corner. The waitress brought menus, giving the tired-looking little girl and her worn teddy bear a sympathetic glance. "What would you like to eat?" Miles asked, realizing he had no idea what kids her age usually ate. "Can I have anything?" Sophie asked, her eyes scanning the menu with interest. "Sure. Then I want pancakes with chocolate syrup," she decided after careful consideration. "Mom only makes pancakes on special days." "Pancakes it is," Miles agreed, ordering himself a coffee, though he had no appetite. While they waited, Miles noticed a toy store across the street, still open despite the late hour. "Wait here a minute. I'll be right back, okay?" Sophie nodded, talking quietly to Mr. Buttons while she waited. Miles crossed the street and entered the store. He picked out a new teddy bear, soft and fancy, with a shiny red ribbon around its neck, quite the opposite of Mr. Buttons, which was worn and patched. After paying him, he returned to the diner where Sophie's pancakes had already arrived. "I brought you something," he said, handing her the store package. Sophie opened it carefully, revealing the new bear. She gave a polite smile and thanked him, but set the new toy aside and held Mr. Buttons even closer. "He's pretty, but Mr. Buttons is my real friend. Mom made him for me when I was born." Miles nodded, realizing his mistake. Of course, a fancy bear from a store couldn't replace something made with a mother's love. Once again, he had thought money could solve a problem that was actually about connection, about meaning. As Sophie ate her pancakes, Miles watched her, noticing every little mannerism that reminded him of Emily. The way she wrinkled her nose slightly when she smiled, how she tilted her head when she was thinking. It was like seeing his sister reflected in a smaller form. That was when Miles made a decision. Watching Sophie with chocolate at the corner of her mouth, fully focused on her pancakes, he knew it was time for the truth. He took a deep breath and said, "I know your mom. Actually, I'm her brother. I'm your uncle." Sophie paused, surprised. The fork hung in midair as she processed the information. "Really? You're Mom's brother? Then, why haven't you ever looked for us?" The question, direct and innocent, hit Miles like a punch. There was no way to soften the truth, nor any reason to try. "Because I was selfish. I only thought about myself. And when we argued, I didn't know how to come back. I stayed away because I thought it was easier. But I was wrong." Sophie put the fork down, studying Miles's face as if searching for something specific in him. "Mom has a picture of you. It's really old. You two are smiling. She kept a picture of me." Miles couldn't hide his surprise. Sophie nodded. "It's in her drawer, along with other important stuff. Sometimes she looks at it and gets sad." Miles felt the weight of those words. Emily hadn't completely erased him from her life. Despite everything, she had kept a reminder of him. Sophie was silent for a moment, then began explaining with the natural innocence only children possess. "We lived in lots of different places. Once we slept in a sewing room because we didn't have money for a real bedroom, but Mom always smiled. She said we'd be fine. Sometimes the lights went out, but she'd light candles and tell stories." Miles listened in silence, heart heavy. Every word Sophie spoke was like a mirror, reflecting how much he had ignored his sister's life, and the child's, for all these years. While he built his career, his sister struggled to feed and house her daughter. While he worried about which model of luxury car to buy next, they slept in a sewing room. But what struck him most wasn't the hardships, it was Emily's resilience. Even in desperate times, she stayed optimistic, creating magical moments for her daughter, turning literal darkness into an opportunity for storytelling. Emily had always been that way, even when they were kids, finding beauty in the simple things, creating something out of nothing, transforming difficulties into lessons. Miles had forgotten that part of her, or maybe chosen not to remember, because it made him question his own life choices. "Your mom's always been like that, strong. Creative," he said, voice choked with emotion. "When we were younger, she could make amazing toys out of things other people would throw away. Like Mr. Buttons." Sophie raised the teddy, showing the different colored buttons that made up its eyes and were sewn around its body. "Each button has a story. This green one was from Grandpa's jacket. The red one was from the first dress Mom sewed by herself." Miles reached out and gently touched one of the golden buttons on the teddy's belly. "What about this one?" Sophie smiled. a smile that brightened her tired face. "Mom said it was from one of your shirts, the one you gave her before you left." A distant memory came to Miles. So a dark blue shirt with small golden buttons that had belonged to their dad for special occasions, later passed on to Miles when he grew. He'd left it for Emily when he moved away, along with other clothes that wouldn't fit in his single suitcase. The fact that Emily had kept that button all those years and sewn it onto Sophie's most treasured toy spoke volumes about how, despite everything, he still had a place in their lives. Miles held Sophie's small hand more firmly, feeling a determination grow within him. He couldn't change the past, couldn't erase 10 years of absence, but he could be present now when they needed him most. Overcome by emotion and the situation, he decided he wouldn't let Sophie spend another night in the hospital, waiting on an uncomfortable chair among strangers. "Why don't we stay at my place tonight? You can have a hot bath, something good to eat, and I'll bring you back early to see your mom." Sophie hesitated, looking at Mr. Buttons as if seeking his advice. "What do you think?" she asked the teddy, placing it near her ear as if listening for an answer. After a moment, she nodded solemnly. "Mr. Buttons says it's okay, as long as we come back really early tomorrow. He doesn't want Mum to wake up worried if I'm not there." "I promise we'll be here first thing," Miles vowed, feeling the responsibility of that pledge weigh on him. It was the first promise he'd ever made to his niece, and he intended to keep it, no matter what. As he paid the check, Miles watched Sophie carefully tuck Mr. Buttons into her small backpack, leaving just the bear's head sticking out so he could breathe. The fancy new teddy bear lay forgotten on the table. Some lessons, Miles thought, were painfully obvious when viewed through the eyes of a child. The worth of something wasn't in its price tag, but in the stories it held, the connections it represented. It was a lesson he needed 10 years, and a tragic accident, to finally begin learning. The private elevator opened directly into the entry hall of Miles's apartment. Sophie, holding tightly to her newly discovered uncle's hand, took a hesitant step inside, her eyes wide as though she'd just entered a fairy tale castle. "You live here alone?" she asked, her voice low, almost reverent. Miles nodded, gazing at his own apartment through Sophie's eyes. Suddenly, the place looked different even to him. The spacious living room with double-height ceilings featured minimalist decor in shades of grey and white, with occasional black accents. Italian designer furniture, abstract sculptures strategically placed, and an entire wall of glass offering a panoramic view of the city lights, everything meticulously chosen by a famous interior designer to impress and showcase status. Sophie let go of his hand and wandered around slowly, gingerly touching the cold surface of a marble coffee table as though she were afraid of breaking it. "It's so big," she commented, looking upward. "And so shiny." Miles had never thought of his apartment as shiny, but he understood what she meant. The recessed ceiling lights, the carefully placed track lighting highlighting works of art, the city's reflection in the polished surfaces, it all created an almost ethereal, impersonal atmosphere. Sophie dashed over to the glass wall, pressing her small hands against the transparent surface. "Look, Mr. Buttons. It feels like we're flying," she exclaimed to the teddy bear, which she held tightly in her other hand. "You can see the whole city from here." Miles joined her, viewing the city from a new perspective. The building lights, the tiny cars moving below, the night sky dotted with faint stars competing against the urban glow. It was truly beautiful, he realized. When was the last time he had truly stopped to admire the view from his own apartment? "Come on, I'll show you where you'll sleep," he said, guiding Sophie down the hallway that led to the bedrooms. He opened the door to the guest room, a space rarely used and decorated in the same sober and impersonal style as the rest of the apartment. The king-size bed looked enormous compared to Sophie's small figure. "Is this bed just for me?" she asked, incredulous. "Yes, unless Mr. Buttons needs space too," Miles tried to joke, still feeling awkward in the role of uncle. Sophie giggled, a bright sound that echoed oddly in the usually silent space. "He sleeps with me. He doesn't need much space. We're good at sharing, right, Mr. Buttons?" Miles noticed Sophie's clothes, rumpled and dirty from the long day at the hospital. "How about a bath before bed? You must be tired." Sophie nodded, following him to the ensuite bathroom. Miles opened the door, revealing a large, luxurious space dominated by an oversized bathtub, separate from the rainfall-style shower. Sophie's eyes grew even wider. "Is that a real bathtub, like in magazines?" Miles felt a pang in his chest. "You've never taken a bath in a tub." Sophie shook her head, still marveling. "We only ever had showers, and sometimes not even that," she answered with the frankness children have. "In our last apartment, the shower broke all the time. Mom used to heat water on the stove and we'd bathe with cups." Miles was momentarily speechless, imagining Emily, his sister, who grew up with him, heating water on a stove to give her daughter a bath. Meanwhile, he had a luxurious jacuzzi tub he rarely used. "Well, let's fill it up then. You can even have bubbles if you want." Sophie's face lit up at the prospect. While the tub filled, Miles realized another issue. He had no children's clothes or suitable bath products. He took out his phone and made a quick call to an assistant, explaining the emergency situation and requesting an immediate delivery of clothes and basic items for a little girl. Meanwhile, Sophie was fascinated by the water jets and the bubbles forming in the tub. She kicked off her worn shoes and dipped a hand into the water to test the temperature, giggling at the sensation. "I'll leave you to it. The towels are over there." Miles pointed to a pile of fluffy white towels. "I'll be right outside if you need anything." Half an hour later, Miles heard the private elevator's bell. The assistant had worked quickly and efficiently, as always. Bags from exclusive children's stores were lined up in the hall. Pajamas, clothes for the next day, hygiene products, even a few books and simple toys. When Sophie emerged from the bathroom, she had a towel wrapped around her small body, looking even tinier against the white, fluffy fabric. Her wet hair formed more defined curls, and her face glowed with cleanliness and excitement. "That was the best bath of my life," she declared, enthused. "The water even gave me a massage." Miles couldn't help but smile. "I got some things for you to wear," he said, showing her the bags. "You can pick whatever you like." Sophie's eyes widened at all the choices. Carefully, as though handling fragile treasures, she looked through the pajamas, finally selecting a simple light blue one with tiny stars. After dressing herself, insisting she could do it alone, Sophie followed Miles to the kitchen. Since he rarely cooked, his refrigerator was usually empty, but the assistant had arranged a grocery delivery as well. Miles heated a light soup and made a simple sandwich, assuming Sophie was probably too tired for a heavy meal. As they ate at the sleek stainless steel kitchen island, Miles noticed Sophie tasted each spoonful with special attention, as if taking in new flavors. "This soup tastes different," she commented. "I can't explain it." "It's asparagus soup," Miles said. "Have you ever tried it?" Sophie shook her head. "But it's good. Strange, but good." After the meal, he led her back to the guest room. Sophie hopped onto the enormous bed, sinking slightly into the plush mattress. "It's like lying on a cloud," she exclaimed, flapping her arms as if making a snow angel. Mr. Buttons was placed carefully on the pillow next to her. Miles pulled the covers over her, feeling strangely protective. "There's an intercom on the nightstand. If you need anything during the night, just press that button, okay? My room's right next door." Sophie nodded, her eyes already heavy with sleep. "Thank you, Uncle Miles," she mumbled, the word uncle sounding natural in her voice, though it still felt strange in his ears. Miles turned off the main light, leaving just a soft bedside lamp on. He stopped at the doorway, looking at the small figure nearly asleep in the huge bed. This child, with her patched-up teddy bear and her ability to marvel at things he took for granted, had filled the empty spaces of his apartment with something he couldn't quite name. Suddenly, all the symbols of his success, the penthouse, the expensive furniture, the exclusive artwork, seemed cold and hollow. For years, he'd built an impressive set piece, but without real life inside it. It took a child, with eyes of wonder and an open heart, to show him how it was nothing more than a stage waiting to be filled with something real. The ICU had its own brand of silence. Not complete. There was the steady beep of monitors, the gentle hum of machines, the occasional whisper of nurses exchanging information, but there was a particular quality to that silence, as if the outside world had been paused, as if time in there followed different rules. Miles sat in the chair beside Emily's bed. It was his fourth consecutive day visiting his sister at the same hour. The doctors had chosen to keep her sedated longer, giving her body the chance to recover from the severe trauma. Under the fluorescent lights of the ICU, Emily looked different, paler, more fragile. The bruises on her face had shifted color, going from deep purple to a greenish yellow at the edges. There were still tubes, providing breathing assistance, feeding, monitoring, each one a reminder of how hard she was fighting to stay in this world. Miles studied her face for a long time. He could see hints of the girl he'd known, the teenager he'd left behind. But there were new lines too. Small wrinkles at the corners of her eyes, a firmness in her jawline that hadn't been there before. The face of a woman who'd faced life alone, raised a daughter without support, had no luxury to falter. "I brought some flowers," he said quietly, knowing she couldn't hear him. "Yellow roses. You always liked those." He placed the small vase on the table beside her, positioning it so it would be in her line of sight if she opened her eyes. "Sophie's doing fine. Don't worry about her," he went on, voice a bit stronger. "She's staying with me. She's an amazing kid, Emily. You've done a wonderful job." The only sound in reply was the steady beeping of her heart monitor. Miles sighed, running a hand through his hair. It was strange how he felt more comfortable talking now that Emily couldn't respond. Maybe because he didn't have to face the judgment in her eyes, the decades worth of hurt. "I've been thinking a lot. About my choices. About everything, really." He paused as if to organize his thoughts. "I built exactly the life I always wanted. The company is growing. I have recognition, money, connections. The penthouse view I would have killed for back when we were younger." Miles glanced at Emily's chest, rising and falling imperceptibly with the help of the machines. "You know what's funny? I realized I've never invited anyone over for dinner. I have no real friends, only contacts, clients, investors." A nurse walked in silently, checking vitals and adjusting a monitor. Miles waited for her to leave before continuing. "Sophie asked me yesterday why all the photos in my apartment are of buildings or landscapes, why I don't have any pictures of people." I didn't know what to say. He leaned back in the chair, feeling the weight of the last few days, the worry about Emily, the sudden responsibility of caring for Sophie, the constant reckoning with the consequences of his past choices. "I guess I built a prison for myself, Emily. A beautiful, expensive, impressive prison, but still a prison." The clock on the wall ticked by in silent precision. Miles had a meeting in 2 hours, but he couldn't bring himself to leave yet. There was something about the stillness of that room, the presence of his unmoving sister, that seemed to demand more from him, as though each visit were a kind of confession. "Sophie drew something last night. She draws a lot. Did you know she has talent just like you?" He smiled faintly, recalling how Emily used to draw when they were kids, even if she had to use the margins of old newspapers when she ran out of paper. She drew the two of us, her and me, holding hands, laughing. There was a huge sun in the sky, one of those that takes up a quarter of the page when kids draw it. And she wrote below it, "Family." Miles felt his throat constrict at the memory. Family. Such a simple word. I used to think I didn't need it, you know? Thought I could replace it with success, achievements. I was wrong. Out in the hallway, someone passed by pushing a cart. The wheel's sound on the vinyl floor was quickly absorbed by the special hush of this place. She calls me Uncle Miles now, like she's always done so, with no hesitation, with a trust I don't deserve. He shifted in the chair, leaning forward slightly toward Emily. "Yesterday she asked if she could teach me how to make pasta the way you do. She said it's the best pasta in the world, but maybe I could learn the basics." He smiled at the thought. "We tried. It was a disaster. We ended up ordering takeout. But she laughed so much, she has a laugh like yours, did you know? The kind that's contagious." A doctor came in, nodding respectfully at Miles while checking the chart. He made a few notes, then left as quietly as he'd arrived. "They're gradually reducing your sedation, the doctors say. They'll try to wake you up soon." "Doctor." "Sharma seems optimistic." Miles paused. "I'm scared, Emily. Scared about what happens when you wake up. What you'll think when you find out Sophie's with me. If you'll hate me even more." The clock advanced a few more minutes, relentlessly. Sophie wants to decorate one of the rooms for you when you're discharged. She's got ideas about colors and curtains. She never doubts you'll make a full recovery. Miles finally stood, feeling pins and needles in his legs from sitting so long. I'm going to pick her up from school now. I found a spot for her at a school near my place. She's already made 2 friends. It's amazing how easily she adapts. He adjusted the vase of flowers one more time. We'll be back this afternoon. Sophie wants to show you her new drawing. Miles lightly touched Emily's hand, a hesitant gesture, as if he were afraid she might vanish at his touch. Her skin felt warmer than he expected, reminding him that despite her fragile appearance, Emily was alive, fighting, as she always had. On the way to Sophie's school, Miles thought about the last decade of his life. Business dinners, work trips, board meetings, successful acquisitions. He had built something impressive, visible, quantifiable. Yet he felt more fulfilled after a night teaching Sophie to play chess, even though she insisted on making her own rules, than he ever had closing his biggest commercial deal. Sophie was waiting for him by the school entrance, sitting on a bench and chatting animatedly with another girl. When she saw him, her eyes lit up. "Uncle Miles," she shouted, running toward him with her backpack bouncing. "I made another drawing today. Want to see?" Miles crouched to her eye level, smiling genuinely. "Of course I do. Is it for your mum?" Sophie nodded, already pulling a sketch pad from her bag. "Yes, I think it'll help her get better faster. My teacher says art has healing power." The page showed 3 figures holding hands, a woman, a man, and a small girl between them. Above was a giant sun occupying much of the paper. At the bottom, in colorful, uneven letters, the same word, family. "It's beautiful, Sophie," Miles said, momentarily speechless at the simplicity and depth of the drawing. "That's the 3 of us," she explained, as though it wasn't obvious. "For when Mom wakes up, so she knows we're waiting for her." Miles felt a lump in his throat and a clarity he hadn't felt in a long time. The loneliness he had so carefully maintained, the isolation he had mistaken for independence, the distance he had kept from genuine connections, all of it now seemed like a monumental waste. "We'll show her today," he promised, holding Sophie's small hand firmly, as though she were an anchor keeping him connected to something real, something true. "Uncle Miles," Sophie said as they walked toward the car, "today's the day to visit Mum with yellow flowers, remember?" "Yes, I've already bought them. They're in the car," Sophie smiled, satisfied. "You're learning fast." Miles couldn't help smiling back. Yes, he was learning, belatedly, awkwardly, but he was learning. Night fell over the city, turning the sky into a gradient of dark blue and purple. The building lights began to flicker on, creating a carpet of artificial stars stretching into the distance. From the top of Miles's apartment, the view was breathtaking. A week had passed since the accident, a week of adjustments, discoveries, and improvised routines. Miles had learned more about childcare in those few days than he'd ever imagined. He discovered Sophie hated brushing her teeth, but loved taking baths in the tub, that she preferred sandwiches with the crust removed, that she was afraid of thunder, but fascinated by lightning. Small details he never imagined would occupy space in his mind now seemed as important as any financial report or business strategy. The evening was peaceful. Miles had cancelled a video conference with foreign investors to have dinner with Sophie. They ate pizza, a rare treat in the girl's previous life, he learned. Then they watched an animated movie she chose about a family of superheroes. Now Sophie lay on the large living room sofa, hugging Mr. Buttons. She wore new pajamas, light pink with little stars, her hair still damp from her recent bath. Miles sat in a nearby armchair, responding to emails on his tablet but only half-focused, always keeping an eye on his niece. The room was quiet, except for the soft background music Miles usually had playing. A jazz playlist that, surprisingly, Sophie said she liked because it sounded like gentle rain. The silence broke when Sophie spoke in her small voice. "Uncle, do you think Mom will wake up?" The question caught Miles off guard. Not because of the topic, it was only natural, but because she asked it so directly, out of the blue, as if it had been on her mind for a long time and she'd just found the courage to voice it. He set the tablet aside, feeling the weight of responsibility in his words. Sophie watched him with those big, trusting eyes that always seemed to expect honesty. Miles swallowed hard. He got up and sat next to her on the sofa, searching for the right words. "I think she will, and when she does, you'll be able to tell her all about what you've been doing." It was the truth, or what he believed to be true. The doctors were gradually reducing Emily's sedation. Her vital signs had stabilized. There was reason to be cautiously optimistic. Sophie's smile was small but genuine, not fully erasing the worry in her eyes, yet still showing a real spark of hope. "I'm going to tell her you took care of me, that you let me sleep in your big bed, gave me nice-smelling clothes, and taught me how to eat sushi." Miles laughed, genuinely moved by the simplicity and sincerity of her words. Yes, the day before he'd spontaneously ordered sushi for dinner. Sophie had never tried it and approached it with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. She ended up loving the salmon hand roll, though she made a hilarious face when tasting wasabi. Those little moments, trivial for others, were unveiling an entirely new life before Miles. A life in which small joys, Sophie's smile when trying something new, her laugh when he mispronounced a cartoon character's name, felt more significant than signing million-dollar contracts. Sophie squirmed, hugging Mr. Buttons more tightly, as if gathering courage for her next question. "Do you think she'll be mad at you?" Miles took a deep breath. It was a fair question, a concern he also shared. "Maybe at first. We have a lot to talk about, your mum and I." "She's not really mean," Sophie explained, with the certainty of someone who knows intimately. "Sometimes she gets sad and it looks like she's mad, but it goes away after a while." Miles nodded, grateful for the insight. "I'll remember that." Sophie went quiet, thoughtful, as if processing something complex in her mind. Then, without warning, she reached out and hugged Miles tightly, one of those full, childlike embraces with no reservations, no calculation. "I think you're a good uncle," she whispered against his shoulder. "You just took a while to show up." Her words were like a punch to Miles's gut, momentarily knocking the wind out of him. There was so much truth in that simple observation, so much undeserved absolution, that he felt his eyes burn with unshed tears. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting himself be wrapped in that small but powerful hug. The weight of the past, the absence, all the selfish decisions he'd made, all the missed moments, all the calls he never made. Everything seemed to be slowly changing into something new. Presence. He couldn't change the past. He couldn't recapture the years he hadn't seen Sophie grow or stand by Emily's side, but he could be there now. He could be there tomorrow, and the day after, and every day from now on. "Thank you, Sophie," he said, his voice slightly trembling. "I'm trying to be." She pulled back and looked at him seriously, as if assessing how genuine he was. "You are. Mr. Buttons agrees with me," she stated, lifting the teddy bear as undeniable proof. "And he knows a lot of grown-ups, so he knows what he's talking about." Miles laughed, discreetly wiping the corner of his eyes. "Well, if Mr. Buttons says so, it must be true." Sophie yawned, exhaustion finally outweighing the seemingly boundless energy she'd had all day. "I think someone's ready for bed," Miles suggested, getting up and holding out his hand. "Just 5 more minutes," Sophie pleaded, using that universal kid tactic to delay bedtime. 5 minutes, Miles agreed, knowing it would probably turn into 10 or 15. He discovered he had a hard time denying Sophie's reasonable requests. They sat in silence a bit longer, gazing at the illuminated city through the glass wall. It was like looking at a personal universe, full of life, movement, and possibility. "When Mom comes to live here, she'll like the view," Sophie said matter-of-factly, as though it were already decided. Miles didn't correct her assumption. Instead, he allowed himself, for just a moment, to imagine how that might be. Emily recuperated, the 3 of them together, not necessarily in that sterile penthouse he called home, but somewhere they could truly call home. "I think she'll like it too," he finally answered. Sophie yawned again, more deeply this time, and Miles realized the negotiated 5 minutes were up. Gently, he lifted her, still surprised at how light she was, and carried her to her room. "Can we visit Mom earlier tomorrow? she asked sleepily, resting her head on his shoulder. Sure, right after breakfast. He placed her in bed, tucked her in, and arranged Mr. Buttons beside her. Sophie was almost asleep but managed a small "Good night, Uncle Miles" before her eyes finally closed. "Good night, Sophie," he replied, dimming the lamp to the soft glow she preferred. He lingered at the door a moment, watching the small figure asleep in that big bed. He thought about how in just a week his life had been completely reconfigured. His apartment, once just a place to pass through, now had drawings on the fridge. His immaculate bathroom now had rubber ducks in the bathtub. His meticulously structured routine now included school pickups, homework, and bedtime stories. The most surprising thing was how none of it felt like a burden or a sacrifice. Instead, it felt as if he were finally living his own life rather than just managing it. Presence, not just existence. Maybe that was what he'd been seeking all these years without even knowing it. Morning arrived quietly at the hospital, the first rays of sunlight filtering through partially drawn blinds. The room was calm, with only the rhythmic sound of the monitors breaking the silence. Emily Carter had been in the ICU for 2 weeks. Over the last 3 days, the medical team had gradually reduced her sedation, waiting for signs that she could regain consciousness. Emily's first sensation was discomfort, a dryness in her throat, a distant ache softened by what she assumed were painkillers. Her eyelids felt as heavy as lead. The effort to open them felt monumental, like scaling a steep mountain without gear. But something stronger than physical discomfort pushed her toward the surface of awareness. A maternal instinct, a visceral need to know where her daughter was. Sophie. Where was Sophie? Her last clear memory was the accident, the screech of tires on the road, the feeling of being tossed, the impact. Then disjointed fragments, faces hovering over her, bright lights, urgent voices, her own voice, weak but determined, asking about Sophie. Then darkness. With tremendous effort, Emily finally opened her eyes. Even the soft light felt painfully intense. She blinked a few times, trying to adjust her vision. The white ceiling, the pale walls, the antiseptic smell. She was definitely in a hospital. She moved her head slightly, feeling a spike of pain. That's when she saw them. In a large armchair at the corner of the room, Miles slept with Sophie nestled against his chest. The little girl was wrapped in a thin hospital blanket, Mr. Buttons squeezed between her and her uncle. Miles had one protective arm around her, his head tilted uncomfortably to the side, his tie loosened and his dress shirt wrinkled, as if he'd come straight from work. Emily blinked, thinking it might be a hallucination, a bizarre dream brought on by medication. Miles, her brother Miles, who hadn't spoken to her in over a decade, the same man who chose ambition over family, the same man who vanished from her life without calls or visits. And now here he was, cradling Sophie as if she were the most precious thing in the world. The scene was as surreal as it was moving. Her daughter and her brother, 2 pieces of her life that had been separated, were now united in a single image. Emily felt a tidal wave of contradictory emotions. Gratitude because Sophie clearly wasn't alone and had been cared for. Relief, her daughter was okay, sleeping peacefully. Confusion. How did Miles end up here? How had he found Sophie? And, inevitably, a renewed sting of hurt. Why only now, after a tragedy, had he reappeared? But there was something else. Something she hadn't expected to feel. A sense of peace upon seeing them together. Sophie looked so comfortable, so safe in her uncle's arms. And Miles, even in sleep, wore an expression she didn't recognize. Softer, less guarded. Emily tried to move again, but felt sharp pain in various parts of her body. There were devices connected to her, tubes and wires, physical reminders of the trauma she'd endured. A monitor to her right beeped more rapidly as she shifted. The slightly altered sound was enough to wake Miles. He opened his eyes slowly, adjusting to the light, trying not to move too much and disturb Sophie. Then his gaze met Emily's. The impact was immediate. Miles's eyes went wide, his body suddenly rigid. For an instant it felt like time froze between them. 10 years of silence, 10 years of distance, 10 years of unspoken words, all suspended in that single moment of recognition. Emily observed him, now noticing details she'd missed on first glance. The tension lines around his eyes, the first grey hairs at his temples, the obvious fatigue on his face. Miles looked older, but not just from the passage of time. There was a heaviness in his expression, a depth that hadn't been there before. No one spoke. They didn't have to. The look they exchanged held everything: the pain of the past, the confusion of the present, the uncertainty of the future. But there was also something Emily never expected, a silent request for forgiveness. Carefully, Miles adjusted Sophie in the armchair so he could stand without waking her. He walked over to the bed, his steps tentative, as though afraid Emily might vanish at any moment. He stopped beside her, looking down at his sister with an expression Emily had never seen in him before. Vulnerable, exposed, without the defenses he'd always used. Still silent, Miles reached out his hand, a tentative, almost shy gesture. He paused halfway, as if suddenly unsure if he had the right to touch her. Emily looked at his outstretched hand. Despite the pain, the confusion, the thousand questions swirling in her mind, she felt something undeniable. This was her brother, the same boy who defended her on the school playground, the same teenager who helped her with math at night, the same young adult who held her hand at their parents' funeral. Before he was the man who abandoned her, he'd been her brother, her protector, her family. With monumental effort, Emily moved her own hand toward his. The motion was slow, painful. Each inch of victory over the tubes, over her weakness, over the years of resentment. Their fingers touched, a light, almost imperceptible contact, yet loaded with meaning. Still wordless, Miles intertwined his fingers with hers, careful not to disturb the medical equipment. His hand was warm, firm, anchored in reality, while Emily still felt she was floating between levels of consciousness. The contact broke something inside Miles. Emily saw him swallow hard, saw his eyes grow moist with unshed tears. He had never been one to cry, even as a child. Always the strong one, always controlled. To see him like this, on the verge of an emotional breakdown, was as surreal as the whole situation. Sophie stirred in the armchair, mumbling something unintelligible in her sleep and hugging Mr. Buttons tighter. The sound broke the moment, drawing them back to the present reality. Miles glanced at Sophie, then back at Emily, as if suddenly remembering all the explanations he owed her. Emily gave his hand a gentle squeeze, about all she could manage in her weakened state. It was a gesture that said, "Later. There will be time for that later." He seemed to understand, nodding almost imperceptibly. The silence between them shifted. It was no longer the silence of 10 years apart, but a shared silence, one almost intimate, a silence that spoke of acknowledgement, of understanding, of a bridge slowly being rebuilt. Emily felt fatigue pulling her under once more, her eyelids growing heavy. Even that brief interaction had drained her limited energy. Before her eyes closed, she saw Miles lean in and kiss her forehead softly, a gesture he hadn't done since they were kids. As her consciousness faded again, Emily caught one last glimpse of Miles returning to the armchair, sitting carefully so as not to disturb Sophie, adjusting the blanket around the sleeping girl. Her final sensation before slipping back into unconsciousness was a strange peace. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It wasn't forgetting. Never would be. But it was a beginning. A kind of awakening, not just of her body after trauma, but of something deeper that had lain dormant between them for so long. In that quiet morning, without a single word spoken, Emily and Miles understood what had been left hanging all those years. And maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to recover it. The days after Emily woke took on a new routine. The hospital, once a place of anxiety and waiting, became the main setting for the silent rebuilding of a broken family. Her room, once impersonal, now was decorated with colorful drawings on the walls, small vases of yellow roses on the windowsill, and occasional visits from Mr. Buttons at the bedside whenever Sophie decided her mom needed extra company. Dr. Sharma had been clear about the recovery process. Emily would still face weeks of hospitalization, followed by months of physical therapy. The accident had caused significant damage that would require time and patience to heal. Each patient responds differently, the doctor explained during a morning visit. But Emily is young and was healthy before the accident. That's in her favor. Miles rearranged his entire life to adapt to this new reality. He delegated responsibilities at work, postponed projects, set up a home office for when he absolutely had to work. Jennifer, his assistant, was concerned by his drastic shift. "Are you sure everything's okay, Mr. Wilson? I've never seen you cancel a board meeting before." "I've never been more sure of my priorities, Jennifer," he replied, surprising even himself with his conviction. Every morning, Miles and Sophie arrived early at the hospital. A routine had been established. Breakfast at a nearby coffee shop, where Sophie always ordered pancakes with chocolate syrup, and then a short, leisurely walk to the hospital, during which she told elaborate stories about Mr. Buttons and his nightly adventures. In the hospital, Sophie would rush to a small table in the corner of the room, her creative space, spending hours drawing while the adults talked or when Emily needed rest. For a child who had almost lost her mother, Sophie showed remarkable resilience. "Look, Mom, I drew us at the park Uncle Miles took me to yesterday. This is the pond with the ducks, and here's Mr. Buttons eating ice cream." Emily would smile from her hospital bed, eyes shining with a mix of love and gratitude. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. You captured Mr. Buttons's expression perfectly." Miles observed these interactions in silent fascination. The bond between mother and daughter was almost tangible, forged in countless small moments throughout the years he'd been absent. They had their own language, references only they understood, a history he hadn't been part of. Instead of feeling excluded, though, these observations fueled his determination. He couldn't reclaim the lost time, but he could be there now, starting to build his own connection with both of them. On the afternoons Emily needed physical therapy or rest, Miles took Sophie on little outings. They discovered a park near the hospital, with a pond where ducks swam peacefully. They found a corner ice cream parlor that quickly became a favorite. They visited a children's bookstore, spending hours browsing illustrated stories. "Don't tell Mum we had ice cream again," Sophie would whisper conspiratorially, licking sticky fingers. "She says too much sugar is bad for my teeth." "It'll be our secret," Miles would reply, feigning serious concern. "But only because we're in a special situation." These small secrets, these simple but meaningful routines, were all new to Miles. His entire adult life had been about major conquests, million-dollar negotiations, complex strategies. Now he found satisfaction in something as simple as making Sophie laugh with a silly joke or helping her choose a new book. One particularly pleasant afternoon, as they walked back to the hospital after a long stroll through the park, Sophie said something that perfectly captured this transformation. "I like it when you wait with me. It feels like time doesn't go by so fast." Her comment took Miles by surprise. He remembered how, just weeks earlier, he'd viewed any waiting as wasted time. "What do you mean, Sophie?" "Before, when I waited by myself, it felt like forever. But when you wait with me, it's different. It's better." Miles smiled, realizing the depth hidden beneath her simple words. For a child whose father was gone, whose mother lay in the hospital, having someone simply be present, someone who waited with her, was a priceless treasure. Emily, in turn, watched their growing relationship with quiet emotion. From her hospital window, she sometimes saw them returning from their outings, Sophie excited, talking non-stop, Miles listening intently, occasionally laughing at something she said. It was a version of her brother she didn't know or had forgotten existed. During evening visits, when Sophie was often tired and fell asleep in the armchair, Emily and Miles had moments for more private conversations. These were still hesitant dialogues, carefully navigating around a decade of silence. "How is she adapting to your apartment?" Emily asked one night, while Miles adjusted her pillow. "Surprisingly well. She's completely transformed the place." He paused, smiling slightly. "I never imagined my minimalist penthouse could accommodate so many drawings and toys." "Sophie has a knack for filling empty spaces," Emily said, a trace of pride in her voice. Miles nodded, catching the deeper meaning in her comment. "She talks a lot about you, about how you two always did everything together, how you could find solutions even when times were tough." He hesitated. She mentioned sleeping in a sewing room when you couldn't pay the rent. Emily glanced away, a slight blush on her pale cheeks. We did what we had to do. It wasn't always easy, but we made it. You did more than make it. You raised an incredible child, Emily. She's happy, creative, confident, despite everything. Silence followed, loaded with untold stories of daily struggles Miles was only beginning to comprehend. Moved by a feeling that had been building in him for days, he bowed his head and finally said, I want to take care of you both now. No matter what happened before, I promise I'm never going to leave you two again. I know I can't erase the past, but I can be here from now on. He took a deep breath, speaking in a softer tone, almost a whisper. I didn't know how to come back. And now that I'm here, everything seems clear. I left you behind, but I want to try. I want to fix what I can. The words hung in the air, vulnerable in their sincerity. Emily looked at her brother, the powerful businessman now laid bare, stripped of the layers of protection he'd spent years building. Slowly, she reached out and touched his hand. You don't have to promise anything. Just stay. The simplicity of that request carried a depth they both understood. It wasn't about grand vows or elaborate guarantees for the future. It was about now, about presence, about choosing to stay when it would be easier to leave again. At that moment, Sophie roused from her nap in the armchair. Sensing a special moment, she pulled a new drawing from her backpack and came over to the bed. Wordlessly, she sat between Miles and Emily, occupying the space that had been empty for so long. Naturally, she took each of their hands and said, with the wisdom only a child can have, now you can play together again. That innocent observation, so simple yet so profound, brought tears to Emily's eyes. Miles gently squeezed Sophie's small hand, finding in it a strength he hadn't realized he needed. The days flowed with a renewed sense of purpose. Emily's condition improved steadily. Finally, 3 weeks after the accident, Dr. Sharma came into the room wearing a subtle smile. I have good news. I think we can discharge you tomorrow. Sophie let out a joyful squeal, jumping from the chair where she was drawing. Miles felt a wave of relief so profound he had to sit down. The doctors, however, raised his hand to signal caution. But there's still a long road ahead. You'll need regular physical therapy, rest, and strict medication. And you'll need someone with you at all times, at least for the first few weeks. Before Emily could voice her concerns, Miles spoke up. She'll stay with me. I have space. I can work from home. And I've already hired a nurse for the times I need to step out. Later, while the final discharge papers were being processed and Sophie had gone with a nurse, Miles sat on the edge of Emily's bed, holding her hand firmly. I want you both to live with me, at least until you recover, and after that too, if you'd like. That place is too big for just me, and too small without you. Emily studied her brother's face, looking for any sign of hesitation or fleeting guilt. She saw only sincerity. Are you sure, Miles? Your life will change completely. My life's already changed completely. And for the first time in a long while, it feels absolutely right. Emily hesitated for only a moment before nodding. It wasn't just about practicality and the need for care. It was a choice of reconciliation, a willingness to believe that new beginnings were possible. The next day, under a surprisingly clear sky, Emily left the hospital in a wheelchair, still fragile, her body visibly weakened, but with a shy smile lighting up her face. Sophie bounced along beside her, holding Mr. Buttons and constantly checking that her mum was comfortable. Miles pushed the wheelchair carefully, mindful of every bump in the path. For the first time in many years, the three walked together like a family. Not a perfect or unscarred family, but a real one, rebuilding itself. At the apartment, Emily looked on in awe at the spaciousness, the elegant furniture, the panoramic view Sophie had described many times. But what truly moved her was seeing her daughter run freely from room to room, safe and happy, as though she already belonged there. In the days that followed, a new routine took shape. Miles tried, sometimes awkwardly, to learn the rhythms of his sister and niece. He found out Emily preferred tea over coffee in the morning, that Sophie needed help tying her shoes, but insisted on choosing her own clothes, that both enjoyed reading before bed, He messed up frequently, forgot medications, made meals Emily couldn't yet digest, got the school schedule mixed up, but he didn't give up. Every mistake was a lesson, every small success a victory. Miles outfitted the guest room for Emily with adaptations for her recovery and turned one of the spare rooms into a little art space for Sophie. The once impeccably organized and impersonal apartment now had drawings on the fridge, toys occasionally left on the sofa, and photographs starting to fill previously empty frames. In the evenings, the three of them ate dinner together. It was different from Miles's solitary meals or the rushed dinners Emily and Sophie used to have between work shifts and homework. There was real conversation, laughter, comfortable silences. Emily watched her brother try so hard, setting the table, remembering small details, truly listening when Sophie shared elaborate stories about Mr. Buttons. She saw how he meticulously noted down medication times, researched recovery guidelines, tried to anticipate needs. She realized, with growing surprise and emotion, that something inside him really was changing, and for the first time since they reunited, she allowed herself to believe that maybe the brother she lost long ago was indeed returning. Not exactly the same, but perhaps a better version, more aware, more present. With Emily on the mend, the three began relearning the art of living together. It was a delicate process, sometimes painful, often confusing, but always moving forward. Miles took an active role in caring for both of them, helping with Sophie's routine, trying to foresee what Emily might need. He still made mistakes, still felt out of his element, but he kept trying. Persistence, more than perfection, was what mattered. Emily watched everything quietly, deeply moved by a transformation she never thought she'd witness. The ambitious, distant brother was gradually giving way to someone more present, more attentive, more human. And somewhere between the on-time medications, the drawings taped to the fridge, and the bedtime stories, a family was being pieced back together, not from scratch, but from fragments patiently gathered and glued with hope and patience. An imperfect family, in progress, learning that sometimes the deepest bonds are forged in the silence between words, in the space where actions speak louder than promises, where constant presence finally heals the wound of prolonged absence. Sunday dawned with a golden light shining through the apartment curtains. 3 months had passed since Emily was discharged from the hospital. 3 months of small daily victories, adaptations, and mutual discoveries. Intensive physical therapy was yielding visible results. Emily could walk around the apartment without a cane, though she still struggled with longer distances. Miles woke to the sound of low voices and stifled laughter coming from the kitchen. He checked the clock, just after 7 in the morning. For a man who used to get up at 5 on the dot every day, even on weekends, sleeping until 7 felt almost sinful. Now, though, he'd learned to savor a few small luxuries in life, like the pleasure of waking up naturally, without an alarm. He left his room still wearing pajamas, another new habit. The old silk pajamas had been replaced by more comfortable, less formal ones Sophie had picked out on a shopping trip. "Nobody wears such serious pajamas, Uncle Miles," she declared with the authority of someone who knows all about it. Approaching the kitchen, he heard more laughter and the clatter of utensils. He paused in the doorway to watch unseen for a moment. Sophie stood on a step stool by the stove, a large spoon in one hand and a pancake griddle in the other. Emily, seated on a nearby chair, supervised with amused attention. Mr. Buttons occupied a special spot on the counter, wearing a makeshift apron made from a napkin. "You have to flip it now, real quick," Sophie insisted, fully focused. "When the little bubbles show up, Mum always says it's time to flip." "Be careful not to burn yourself," Emily warned gently, smiling at her daughter's seriousness. Sophie bit her lip in concentration and tried to flip the pancake, but she didn't have enough force. The result was a somewhat folded, somewhat spread out blob, far from the perfect shape she'd imagined. "Oops," she muttered, glancing at her mom with a mix of disappointment and humor. "That's perfect for a first pancake," Emily assured her. "Nobody gets it right on the first try. Remember my story about the pancake that stuck to the ceiling?" Sophie giggled, nodding enthusiastically. "That was when we lived in the yellow apartment. You said the pancake was so scared it tried to run away to the sky." Miles couldn't help smiling as he listened. These little stories mother and daughter shared, these glimpses into a life he hadn't been part of, once made him feel bittersweet. Now, though, he found himself simply grateful he could at least hear about those moments. "Good morning," he finally said, stepping into the kitchen. "From the smells and sounds, I'm guessing we're having a special breakfast." "Uncle Miles," Sophie exclaimed, nearly dropping the spoon. "We're making surprise pancakes for you." But now it's not a surprise anymore. "Technically, it's still a surprise because I haven't tasted them yet," Miles answered diplomatically. "Do you want to learn how to make them too?" Sophie offered, eyes bright with excitement. "Mom says you were never that good in the kitchen, even when you were kids." Miles shot a questioning look at Emily, who shrugged with an innocent smile. "I might have mentioned you once tried to make a peanut butter and sardine sandwich to impress a neighbor," Emily explained. "In my defense, I was 9 and had limited culinary knowledge," Miles protested, approaching the stove. "And I'm absolutely willing to learn now. Teacher Sophie, I'm in your hands." Sophie beamed, delighted by the role reversal. Usually, she was the one learning from adults. Now she got to teach her uncle something, a clear source of pride. "First, you need an apron," she declared seriously. "Mum always says real cooks wear aprons." Miles looked around, seeing only Emily's floral apron hanging on a hook. Sophie followed his gaze and laughed. "You can wear mine," she offered generously, handing him a small blue apron decorated with cartoon dinosaurs wearing chef hats. It was obviously much too small, but Miles accepted it with all the solemnity the occasion demanded. "Perfect," he declared, fastening the tiny apron around his neck like an improvised tie. Emily couldn't suppress her laughter at the sight of the imposing businessman wearing a kid's dinosaur apron. "Now you have to prepare the batter," Sophie continued. "But we already did that while you were sleeping. It's really easy: eggs, milk, flour, a little sugar, and the secret ingredient." "What's the secret ingredient?" Miles asked with genuine curiosity. Sophie held a finger to her lips, glancing at her mom, who nodded permission. "Cinnamon," she whispered dramatically. "Just a tiny bit." "Makes all the difference." Paragraph 547 is intentionally left blank as no text was given in the source. Please continue to paragraph 548. "I'll remember that," Miles promised, matching her serious tone. Sophie poured a ladleful of batter onto the hot griddle. "Now watch for bubbles. When you see a lot of bubbles, that's when it's time to flip." Miles watched intently as the batter spread out and started forming little bubbles on the surface. There was something oddly mesmerizing about the process, something that challenged the complexity he was used to. A simple pancake required patience. You couldn't rush or force it. It had to follow its natural timing. "I think it's ready to flip," Sophie announced after a few moments. Miles picked up the spatula, uncertain. "I'm sure I'll mess this up." "Everyone messes up the first times," Sophie said, with the wisdom of her few years. "It's okay. We can make more." Encouraged, Miles slid the spatula under the pancake and, with a move he intended to be confident, tried to flip it. The result was catastrophic. The pancake folded onto itself. Part of it stuck to the spatula, and part spilled over the edge of the griddle. "Oh," was all he could say, staring at the misshapen blob of batter. For a moment, the kitchen was silent. Then Sophie began to laugh, a genuine, joyful, contagious laugh. Emily joined in, trying unsuccessfully to hide her smile behind her hand. Miles looked at his culinary disaster and, to his own surprise, started laughing too, a free, unguarded laughter he couldn't remember having in years. "That," Sophie managed between giggles, "was even worse than my first try." "I think the pancake wasn't just scared," Emily said, wiping away tears of laughter. "It was totally panicked." "Well, at least we've established a new standard of culinary disaster," Miles replied, still chuckling as he scraped the remains off the griddle. "Anything above that can be considered a success." Sophie handed him another ladle of batter. "Try again, Uncle Miles. The second one always comes out better." And surprisingly, it did. Not perfect, far from it, but at least recognizable as a pancake. The third was better still. And by about the fifth attempt, Miles was making pancakes that were reasonably round and golden. "I'm impressed," Emily said. watching the growing stack of pancakes on the plate in the center of the table. For someone who once tried making coffee with cold water, that's significant progress. I was 12, maybe, Miles protested as he flipped another pancake with increasing confidence. And in my defense, no one told me the water needed to be hot. Wait, seriously, Sophie asked, wide-eyed. Uncle Miles didn't know how to make coffee. Your uncle had many talents, Emily explained, sharing a teasing look with Miles. Math, chess, convincing people to do things for him, but cooking definitely wasn't one of them. Until now, Miles added, feeling exaggerated pride as he slid a perfectly round pancake onto the plate. Sophie's a wonderful teacher. The little girl beamed with pride. Mum taught me everything. She's the best cook ever. Emily smiled, touched by her daughter's compliment. She looked at the pair in the kitchen, Miles still wearing the tiny apron, Sophie on her step-stool directing the operation with authority, and felt a wave of emotion she couldn't immediately name. It wasn't just happiness, though happiness was part of it. It was something deeper, more substantial, safety, that was it. For the first time in a long time, maybe since their parents died, Emily felt like she didn't have to be strong alone. There was someone else to share the burden, to help carry responsibilities. Someone else Sophie could rely on. They're ready, Sophie declared, eyeing the tall stack of pancakes with satisfaction. Now we need chocolate syrup, butter and strawberries. I think we have all of that, Miles confirmed, opening the fridge. Since Emily and Sophie had moved in, the once nearly empty refrigerator now held a remarkable variety of foods, another small sign of how life had changed. They sat around the kitchen table, a recent purchase made specifically because Emily casually mentioned she'd always dreamed of a large wooden table for family meals. Miles had ordered one the next day, custom-made by a local woodworker. Who wants the first taste? Sophie asked, watching anxiously as Miles and Emily served themselves. I think the honor should go to our new chef, Emily suggested, looking at her brother. Miles cut a generous slice of pancake, covered in chocolate syrup and topped with a strawberry. As he tasted it, his eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. This is really good, he announced. No need to fake enthusiasm. See? I told you the secret was the cinnamon, Sophie exclaimed, helping herself to her own portion. Emily took a bite too and nodded approvingly. I think we've found our official Sunday pancake chef. As they ate, they talked about the coming week's plans. Emily had a job interview on Monday, a position as a seamstress at a bridal atelier. Initially, she worried she wasn't ready to work yet, but Miles and Sophie encouraged her. You can start part-time, Miles suggested, recalling their conversation as he reached for another pancake. The atelier seems flexible from what you've said. And I can stay here with Uncle Miles after school on the days you work, Sophie chimed in. He already knows how to make my favorite snack and everything. Emily smiled, grateful for their support. You're both right. I think I'm ready to try. By the way, Miles said casually, though clearly he'd been planning this moment. Speaking of interviews, I had an idea I wanted to discuss with you two. Emily raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. I've been thinking a lot about the future, about the three of us, about this apartment. Are you tired of us? Sophie asked directly, her face worried. No, just the opposite, Miles rushed to clarify. In fact, I was thinking, this apartment never felt like a home until you both came. It's beautiful, has an incredible view, but it's always been more like a luxury hotel suite, a place to sleep between work commitments. Emily nodded, understanding. She had noticed from the start how the space, despite its elegance, lacked any personal touch before they arrived. So I was thinking, Miles continued, maybe we could look for a new place, a house perhaps. Something we could decorate together, that would have a piece of all of us in it, a real family home. There was a moment of silence as Emily processed the proposal. It wasn't just about moving, it was about formalizing the arrangement they'd created, turning a temporary solution into something permanent. Are you serious? She finally asked. Completely, Miles affirmed. But only if you both want it. Emily, I know you've always dreamed of having your own space, so I'd understand if, down the line, you'd prefer a place just for you and Sophie. But a house with a yard, Sophie interjected, eyes shining. We could get a dog and plant flowers and have picnics. Exactly, Miles smiled, grateful for his niece's enthusiastic interruption. And it would be our place for real. Emily looked from her brother to her daughter, then back again. She saw the sincere hope in Miles's eyes, so different from the calculating, distant man he once was. She saw Sophie's excitement, already envisioning how this new home might be. I think it's a wonderful idea, she said softly yet firmly. A new beginning. For all of us. The smile that spread across Miles's face lit up his whole expression. Great. I already have a few listings to show you. There's one house with an incredible backyard about 20 minutes from here. You've already been looking, Emily laughed, shaking her head. That's so typical of you, always one step ahead. This time, he said gently, I like to think I'm one step beside you, walking with you, not ahead. 2 weeks later, the three of them returned to the hospital for Emily's final follow-up with Dr. Sharma. The appointment officially marked the end of her intensive treatment, though she would still need occasional physical therapy sessions. They sat side by side in the waiting area, the same place where it had all begun months ago. Sophie, in the middle, held both Emily's and Miles's hands, swinging her legs while softly recounting a complicated story about Mr. Buttons and his adventures as a teddy bear doctor. Miles looked around at the surroundings, the same blue plastic chairs, the same posters on the walls, the same distant overhead pages. Nothing had changed in that place, yet everything was different. He glanced at his sister, who noticed his gaze and smiled back. A genuine smile that spoke of forgiveness, understanding, new beginnings. A smile that said, despite everything, they had found their way back to each other. What are you thinking about? Emily asked quietly, while Sophie continued her elaborate narrative, now involving an entire hospital for sick teddy bears. About how things change, Miles replied, and how the most important things stay the same, even after so long. Emily nodded, understanding. We are different. Life shaped us in ways we couldn't predict, but we're still us, deep down. Carter Wilson family, a nurse called from the doorway, interrupting the moment. Sophie hopped up first, pulling the adults along by their hands. Let's go. Dr. Sharma's going to be proud of how much better Mum is. As they walked together down the hallway, Miles reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past few months, how a chance encounter, or maybe not so chance, had redirected his entire life. How the simplest things, Sunday pancakes, bedtime stories, shared laughter, had turned out to be the most precious. The waiting room was the same place where it had all started, but now it was a place where something brand new had been born. A second chance, a fresh start, a family rebuilt from the remnants of the past and the promises of the present. Without grand declarations or solemn vows, just the simple certainty that it's never too late to return, to rebuild, to remember what truly matters. And that sometimes the home we've been searching for all our lives isn't a physical place at all, but the people with whom we choose to share our burnt pancakes and imperfect stories, people who rediscover each other amidst the everyday, with the quiet but unshakable assurance that they are right where they belong. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.